Hello, everybody. My name is Dan Petrell with Maryland Realtors. Welcome to the Brokers and Managers Forum webinar. This webinar will be 90 minutes long. It's a little bit longer because there's a lot of information we wish to share with you today. You will notice at the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A box. Please put your questions into the Q&A box and then we will attempt to answer them in the order that they appear. And now it is my pleasure to turn this over to our president for 2020, John A. Harrison. John?
Thank you, Dan. I want to welcome everybody as well. Most of you should know me, but I am John Harrison, your 2020 president for Maryland Realtors. We have quite a distinguished panel this afternoon. In no particular order, but I'm going to start with Chuck Katsky, our CEO for Maryland Realtors. We have Bill Castelli, Senior Vice President of Government Affairs for Maryland Realtors. Colette Massengill, who is a Senior Staff Attorney for Maryland Realtors. And Kathleen D'Artez, who is the Director of Legal Affairs for Maryland Realtors. Before we actually get started, I would be remiss if I didn't mention this anniversary that we're in, today being the 19th anniversary of 9/11, 2001, a day when we were attacked viciously and many innocent souls were murdered. There's no other way to put it. We saw many acts of heroism, both in New York, Flight 93, and at the Pentagon. So I think it would only be appropriate that we take a moment of silence just to reflect, and we will never forget. Thank you. All right, first thing I want to do is give you a quick recap of 2020. I think the better we do it, the better off we'll be. And my screen is now no longer where it was supposed to be. So let's see. First, I want to start with all the presidents that may be out there. I want to thank you for the jobs that you've done, and the local staffs, because we obviously didn't plan the year we ended up with, but everybody stepped up to the plate and should be very proud of the way we've handled this situation. I'm going to go over a couple of points, and I'm not going to belabor any of them because more experts on the panel will give you better details than I will. I am very proud that we had an abbreviated legislative session this year, but we were able to get the professionalism class, which was one of the things I was really trying to get done this year. We got it certified. It added into our ethics class, so we didn't increase your hours, of course. It didn't increase your hours at all. And the class has been approved, it's been designed, and it goes into effect October 1st. So I thank everyone for that participated and helped. Our staff is amazing, which you've heard me tout often. And hey, this is live. What are you going to do? So I'm going to, in case my phone rings again, I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to Chuck Katsky, our CEO.
Thanks, John. I better check my phone now to make sure.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, thank you for that. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Anonymous attendee said, which class? That's the newly revised ethics class. It's your required ethics class. You have to take it every 2 years. You always have for license renewal. Starting October 1st, as John mentioned, there will be a component in there of ethics. I guess Kathleen and Colette, you'll dive into that a little bit greater detail, but the answer is it's the required ethics class. We'll now have a module on professionalism, and I'll let the legal staff go into greater detail on that later on. I wanted to echo John's remarks about the staff before we start, not just the three here, your faces you see, and Dan behind the Maryland Realtors sign. But all of our staff have done an outstanding job. It's just hard to overstate the amount of work that we did, starting March, starting with the lockdown, even before then. And I hope that, and I do know because people have reached out and told us how grateful they are that we were able to, in that incredibly complicated, fast-moving environment, that our professionals were able to digest incredible amounts of information, changing literally hour by hour, synthesize that, put that into a form that is digestible to our members in all of our platforms and in all of our communications channels. Dan Petrell, our communications strategic director of strategic communications, literally had one day in the office. That Monday, when the governor announced the lockdown beginning at 5 p.m., that was Dan's first day on the job. So we had 4 hours, 3 hours to get to know each other. And then we scattered, we closed the office, we went home. We quickly adapted to working from home, getting on all of the platforms, including Zoom, but all the platforms, people using different platforms, getting to know them, adapting to that technology, the resilience that not just us, but you as our members, it displayed through this and are still to this day displaying is pretty phenomenal. And so our communications efforts, our advocacy efforts, and working with this team, I can say very honestly, it is the highlight of my professional career, no doubt about it. Because with the challenges, obviously that presents opportunities, and how you meet those challenges and how you react and how you work through those and become part of a team, to have that mission and to have that focus and to produce what this group of people produced. I just couldn't be more proud of them. So I just wanted to start off with that, and we're going to keep working, obviously. We don't have to work every night and weekend like we did for that first 8 weeks, 9 weeks, 10 weeks. But literally 10 p.m. we were on a Zoom meeting. Literally something had to come out, something changed. Just real quick, for example, before we were deemed quote unquote essential in residential real estate, we had drafted an entire document. We actually had a webinar, and I think I spent 15 minutes talking about the difference between essential and non-essential and how we were going to fit in and all that. And that was on a Friday. Saturday morning, we were deemed essential. And so that we just deleted that from the website, and an entire, 4 or 5 hours of work lasted less than 24 hours. And so we, and then we moved on, and every day it was something else. Every week it was something else. And so I just, again, couldn't be more proud to be part of this team. We are still working from home, as many of us are. We have about half of our staff in the office on any given day, but again, we're communicating all the time. We are adapting new technologies as we speak. We are working and we are incorporating into our workflow for the foreseeable future, probably forever. People talk about the new normal, and this is probably it. And so what we've done is adapt to the changing work environment, and also allowing members to participate through technology like this. Pretty much everything's virtual. The way we see it evolving over time, especially with our committee work, and our elective year and our committee year starts October 1st, we have the option, and if you signed up for our Maryland Realtors Committee, you would have received an email yesterday or the day before. So please respond, hopefully accepting your committee appointment. And we also incorporated into the application process this year a specific request that whether you would be able to or willing to participate remotely. And almost everybody answered yes. And so what we think is the future is hybrid meetings, and which means we do have technology now in our boardroom, and we're going to be adapting it to our larger meeting rooms. We do expect some people to be able to come down to Annapolis and participate in person, while others are participating remotely. So we're set up for that. We're making some tweaks, but we've adapted and we've adopted new technologies. We reprogrammed some money. I have to tell you, our budget is about $5 million. We're almost $600,000 under budget this year. And our fiscal year runs to the October 31st. And we have not spent, because of we spend a lot of money traveling, we go to conferences and do a lot of that kind of stuff. And so we have, it says I'm connecting to audio. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Something else is going on my screen, sorry. So we have kind of reprogrammed a lot of that, some funds that we would normally be spending on other things, all to the benefit of our members, of course. But now we have a whole new way of working with you to continue the work of the association. So we're excited about that. This meeting technology now has vastly improved from just 6 months ago, and we have gotten very comfortable with it. We have our committee meetings, we can vote online, we share documents online. And so we're going to be working as hard as ever for you next year, starting October 1st, our new committee year, our new elective year, and just smart, but as hard as ever. So we're really excited about that. We're having a new phone system, not that you care about that, but it'll help us to work remotely through our cell phones, and it's transparent to people who are calling. It'll be kind of like a virtual extension of our business, our office phones on our cell phones, as we have to, if we're out or working from home or whatever. So those things are coming. I would like to, in the future, again, kind of focusing on technology and also communications, things we have planned for the near and not so near future. We're going to be starting a podcast soon. We have a whole new communications staff. Working with Dan is our newest employee, Josh Woodson, who comes to us with he's a younger guy. He's got excitement. He's got a lot of great ideas. He's extremely comfortable with the technology, and we're going to be asking him to help us produce a podcast. And then we also want to adapt or adopt smart speaker skills, so that you can go to your Alexa or Google speaker and say, hey, Alexa, what's going on at Maryland Realtors? And Alexa will tell you what's coming up, what events are coming up, what things you might want to be able to register for, and then maybe a little legal minute, just a little quick hit on something. And the point is, we still have our magazine, we still have the website, we have our social media channels, but we want to give people the ability to get information in whatever form they're comfortable. And that all of the above strategy means, if you want to take a deep dive, go to the magazine, read a 3 or 4 page article, go to the website, spend as much time there as you need to or that you have. If you want a quicker hit, the podcast will probably less than 30 minutes, probably more like 20, 25 minutes. And then ultimately 1 or 2 minutes just on these real quick hits through the smart speakers. So that's our plan, that we communicate in all of our channels in whatever way people are comfortable, because we deal with 6 generations. I heard that. I think calculation, that's probably true. We have at least 5 generations represented within our membership. People 80-year-olds and 20-year-olds, they're members. And everybody gets information, wants information, consumes information in a different way. So our job is to give people as many channels, as many opportunities to get information in ways that they feel comfortable absorbing it. And that's our mission. And that's kind of what we'll be working on for the next couple of months. Wanted to make sure that everybody knows to tune into our virtual inaugural gala and awards celebration on September 25th. There's a link to it on our website, and We will be broadcasting that live from a local studio here. It's going to be a great production. I'm excited for it. We're going to really adapt to this again and really dive into it. And I think it's going to be fun. I know it's going to be interesting. And so we're looking forward to that. Again, September 25th, starting at 6:30, celebrating Dee Dee Miller's installation. So please join us for that. Last but not least is our advocacy. And I know Bill's going to talk a lot about this later on in terms of what we have planned for the next General Assembly session. But I really think it's important for everybody to understand, and I'm wearing my RPAC pin, oh, it's on this side. And I think when people want to know, what somebody said when I said Alexa.
Good afternoon, Maryland Realtors. This is Rebecca. How can I help you?
Hi, I just talked to April.
That's weird. That says it's me. So sorry about that. Our advocacy, both on the national level, the state level, and the local level, have never been more important than it is today. If you were eligible to collect unemployment benefits as a 1099 independent contractor, you have NAR to thank for that. And not a lot of people know this, and I know a lot of people in other businesses who were independent contractors who never dreamed that they'd be eligible for unemployment. Our advocacy, fueled in large part by our RPAC investments, is what makes us effective. And if anybody has any question about how effective we are, they just need to look at the kinds of things we've been able to accomplish this last 6 months. So with that, I'll turn it over. Who's next on the agenda, Bill? Or
I'll take it for a second, if you don't mind, because I am remiss in one thing. I was talking, we were talking about advocacy, we were talking about advisory groups, we were also discussing relationships. And back in October 19th, 2019, the leadership team discussed governance structure and inclusiveness. And I was remiss in my remarks. I got a little upset when my phone rang. Chuck relieved me of that possibility a minute ago. This is the technology age we're in. But what I did was I put together a PAG, which is a Presidential Advisory Group. And they were looking into how we could diversify both our membership, our leadership, and in doing that, they came up with a couple of suggestions. Specifically, they wanted to create a permanent multicultural real estate advisory group to collaborate on how we can do this. This is an ongoing process. It's not going to be you flip a switch and everything changes. That's not going to happen. So we need to be aware of that. So that was their first suggestion. Second one was they recommended that we have a seat on the board of directors and the executive committee with a representative for the multicultural real estate groups. And that's going to require a bylaws amendment. So in order to do all these things, I've turned them over to Dee Dee, who will be Dee Dee Miller, who's going to be your 2021 president. And she has gotten on board and is going to follow through with these initiatives. So that was one quick thing I was remiss in saying earlier. And with that, I'll shut up again. And it's time for Bill Castelli to fill us in on all the legislative things. Bill?
Thank you, John, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to share my screen. We've got some slides. So I'm going to talk about a couple of different things. I'm going to start off with federal, and Chuck had mentioned a lot of the activity that the state association as well as National Association of Realtors was engaged with, just in terms of making sure real estate was classified as essential services during the pandemic time. But, you know, NAR was integral in the decision to extend unemployment benefits to all the 1099 workers as well. So I'm going to start there, and just to say that next week, the new unemployment benefits, the additional $300 payment is going to start next week. You'll be able to apply for that next week. That is actually a separate thing that the governor undertook. He applied for funding under the Federal Emergency Management Agency and received that. I will tell you that Congress is also under discussion, talking about a bunch of different programs they're going to extend under the CARES Act, including unemployment. The House also had rental assistance as one of the programs that they proposed. The Senate has a package that's a little bit different than the House, just in terms of its scope and cost, and also in terms of some of its elements. It does not include, as an example, the rental assistance, which kind of landlords and I think tenants are looking for. So that extension of whatever that CARES Act, those CARES Act programs are going to look like, we're not going to really know. The Senate passed its version, the House has its version. They're going to be discussing, what they can agree on, and then hopefully we will have some new extension, and hopefully will include some kind of rental assistance. What I can tell you is that at least federally right now, HUD, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac have all extended the mortgage forbearance period, so that if you're dealing with any of your clients or in a home having trouble making payments, that December 31st, 2020 is the new deadline for that mortgage forbearance. It applies to principal homes. It applies to your investment property, secondary homes, as long as it is a federally related loan, which 95% of them are. And once you apply for that forbearance, you can apply up to 12 months worth of forbearance time period. And you would contact your mortgage servicer in order to take advantage of that. The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, also extended the eviction moratorium. There was a lot of concern about that. National Association of Realtors has expressed in many different ways its concern about the extension of the eviction moratorium, because it's mostly just kicking the can down the road. I mean, everybody recognizes there are a lot of tenants in financial difficulty right now, but landlords as well and investment owners as well. And to just kick the can down the road with no assistance for tenants, no assistance for landlords, is just creating a bigger problem at the end, a bigger debt that a tenant is going to have to pay, because this is not rent forgiveness. They're going to have to pay that rent. And the CDC eviction moratorium also allows the collection of penalties and other fees as well. But that's been extended to December 31st, 2020. It is limited in the way that it would only apply to individuals with incomes, if they're filing individually, of less than $99,000, or joint filers of less than $198,000. So there are some limitations to how the eviction moratorium is going to be applied. But if a tenant is having a COVID-related difficulty impact to their income, they are able to, under penalties of perjury, give a notice to the landlord that they are having trouble, and then try to work out, partial payments or some kind of payment plan, but they can't be evicted during that time. Tax on services, now getting to some of the state issues. I'll just quickly mention this. It's more of a thank you. Many of you, I'm guessing, were at our just before everything shut down in March, at our rally where we opposed that tax on services legislation. That bill did not pass this year. And I will tell you, a large part of the reason why it didn't pass was because of your activity. So if you took time out from your day to come down to that rally, thank you so much. You really made an impact, not just on the legislators who were there, but also on the other groups. A lot of the groups were very impressed at how active all of you were and how vocal you were during that debate. But there are a number of bills that are going to take effect starting October 1st of this year. I won't mention, John mentioned the CE bill on ethics and professionalism. And I think our legal department is going to talk a little more detail about what that is, but I'm just going to mention that for your CE requirements, there is going to be an extension of you for 30 days after the governor's emergency order ends for you to, one, extend your license. So if your license runs out, let's say in November, and the emergency order ends by November, you would still have until December in order to renew your license, and you would still have additional time in order to take those CE requirements. So the commission has just issued guidance on that. They've also issued guidance on being able to take classes, CE classes virtually, like this program right here. So I would encourage folks to catch up on their CE if they're behind as much as they can, because when this order does end, within a month, you're still going to have to try and renew your license. Another bill that's going to take effect on October 1st of this year is ground rent escrows. I think most people are probably familiar with what ground rents are. There was a problem with ground rents, though, when a ground rent owner had not registered the ground rent with the Department of Assessments and Taxation. So we had requested legislation to try and deal with that, because what ended up happening is when you had an unregistered ground rent owner, title companies were escrowing money from the seller when they tried to sell that property up to 3 months of ground rent payments. And then theoretically, if that ground rent owner never registered that property during the 3 years, the title company was then required to return that escrow money back to the seller and track them down. And it became a nuisance for title companies. It was hard to track. And it became a nuisance for sellers. And while we weren't talking about a lot of money, the fact that they had to come out of pocket for the escrow for an amount of money that probably was never going to be claimed at all. I mean, probably 99% of the cases, the ground rents were never registered. So the new law makes it clear that the ground rent owner's course of action is against the current owner, not for the debts of the prior owner, but for the debts of the current owner. And then if they did not make an effort to collect those ground rents during the prior owner's tenure, the only thing that they can collect is against the new owner. There was another change to ground rents that clarifies that you no longer have any fee at all. I mean, the fee was very low to register a ground rent. It was $10 for an individual ground rent, $5 for multiple ground rents if you were filing for multiple ground rents. So there really isn't any excuse at all not to register a ground rent. Get that notice out there for the buyers and the sellers. Also legislation regarding pass-through entities, and I'll mention this. If you are organized as an LLC or a subchapter S or a partnership, the state changed the pass-through entity law to allow you to essentially file your taxes at the entity level. So what I would say to you is, and why that's important, is it allows you to take full advantage of the SALT deduction. Many of you are probably aware under the Tax Reform Act that passed federally, all the SALT, the state and local income taxes, property taxes, all of those deductions that you used to be able to claim for the full amount of taxes that you paid were limited to $10,000. That was for the individual filer. But for entities, there was no cap at all. So what this bill does in part is allow any of those subchapter S, LLC partnerships to file at the entity level, claim the full deduction against federal taxes, and get the full benefit of those deductions. This bill was effective of July 1st of this year. It applies to the 2020 tax year, the full tax year. So I would suggest if you are organized in that way, talk to a tax professional just to make sure that, and mention this to them so that they can determine whether it makes sense for you to file at that entity level and get the benefit of the full pass-through of the full SALT deduction. Now, I will tell you, IRS recently issued an order in August, And it did call into question some states that actually tried to do a workaround on the charitable contributions, but they did not call into question the pass-through entity workaround on the SALT deductions. So I think most people who are following this issue pretty closely think that that is a very positive thing, because the states that have done this, Maryland joined about probably 6 or 7 other states that have done this. Some of those states have had this law in place for 2018. So the IRS has had plenty of time to comment on it and could have certainly included it in their guidance on the contribution workarounds, and they didn't. But again, talk to your tax professionals if you're organized in any of those ways. Remote notary, many of you have probably used remote notary or know of colleagues that have used remote notary, especially during the last few months. The governor issued an order back on March 30th permitting remote notarization of all documents. We know that a lot of real estate documents have to be notarized. So this had a particular impact on real estate. We had actually worked with another group to make a permanent change in Maryland law to allow remote notary moving forward. And that law does take permanent effect as of October 1st of this year. Now, you probably won't notice any difference in it, because even though the governor's order that he put in place at the end of March only applied through the extent of the emergency order, it looks like the governor's emergency order is going to pass through that October 1st date. So we are now able to do virtual remote notaries moving forward. And then the last issue I'm going to quickly mention is source of income, property management. Maryland is now a state that recognizes source of income as a protected class. So what does that mean? It means that just like race, creed, color, any of those other protected classes, a source of income is now going to be considered one of those protected classes that you've got to be sure to honor when you're practicing real estate. Many local jurisdictions have had a source of income law, and I'll go over those jurisdictions in a little bit. But the real push on this legislation was to make sure that a source of income would allow for housing assistance vouchers like Section 8 vouchers. So now that source of income is going to be state law as of October 1st of this year, anybody that comes to, if you're a property manager or you're a real estate agent who's working with an investor and they come with a certificate, like a Section 8 certificate, that tenant can't be turned down just because of the Section 8 certificate. That was already the law in about 70%, at least population-wise, of the state, but it is now applies everywhere else in the state. Here are the local laws that were already in place. So Annapolis City, Anne Arundel, Baltimore, et cetera. So those local jurisdictions had already implemented a source of income law. And the difficulty moving forward as of October 1st is going to be that the first step you should take if you're dealing with any kind of property management is go to your local law, determine whether your local law's source of income requirements, because there are some differences in the exceptions, whether your local law has different exceptions than the state law. If you're not in a jurisdiction that's listed above, then you're just going to follow what the state law provides. And the rule of thumb is generally going to be whatever has the more restrictive provision is going to be the provision that you're going to follow. But the state law is targeted. It does have some exceptions. So, you know, there are certain factors that you would consider when you're working with a tenant. And when you're working with an investor or a landlord, the biggest thing that I would like to emphasize is that while the program federally had always been a voluntary program, when someone comes to you with a Section 8 voucher now, you can't turn them down just because of the voucher. You can't advertise that property and say, we don't take Section 8 vouchers, because the fact is you might have to take a Section 8 voucher. But there are factors to consider. Can the tenant afford the advertised rent, even with the voucher? So if the tenant can't afford the advertised rent without the voucher, then that's not a property that they're going to be eligible for. Creditworthiness. You're still able to check a tenant's creditworthiness to determine whether they are a better tenant than another person. If the owner is not using a real estate licensee, so they're not using a property manager or someone who's deemed to be in the business of selling real estate, and they themselves are not deemed to be in the business of real estate because they're only renting fewer than 3 properties, then they are not required to take a source of income. And again, these are the state rules, so the local rules may differ a little bit. But if they are working with a real estate professional, property manager, someone in the business, then they do have to take a source of income. And then finally, the last exception under the state rule is if an owner is living in the property that is rented and the property has 5 or fewer units, they would not be required to take a source of income. But again, check with your local counties. Some of them don't have the owner exception that the state law does. Some of the factors like creditworthiness are a little bit different in some of the counties. So you'll want to check to make sure that the state law and your local county law provisions kind of match up on a lot of that stuff. And we hope to be giving more guidance on this and maybe even providing a little bit of Q&A on it. We're still trying to get some of the local laws, and we'll be posting that on the website. So I am going to end there and pass it on to the next person.
Thank you, Bill. Next up, we have Colette Massengale. She's the senior staff attorney. I think she's got some forms and things she's going to update us on. Colette?
Thank you, John. Yes, I do. I've got a couple of forms updates to talk to you guys about. Thank you for joining us today. As you know, just to give you a little bit of update, the forms have gone out to all the forms vendors. So they will be ready to post them on October 1st, and we will be posting them on Maryland Realtors website early next week. So look out for them. As usual, there will be a list of the forms there with the summary of changes and practice tips. So I'm just going to go over them a little bit, and I will share my screen. Can you all see my screen? Okay. All right. So here are the summary, October 2020 summary of changes and practice tips. And I'll just go through the forms, just kind of give you an idea of what some of the changes are. There's only one new form this year. It's the 1031 Tax-Deferred Exchange Addendum. Here it is. And for those of you, you may be familiar with this language. I know some of the local boards already have a 1031 Tax-Deferred Exchange provision. So this language will look familiar, but this is a standalone new Maryland Realtors form to enable buyers and sellers to facilitate a 1031 tax-deferred exchange. And so I think the form is pretty straightforward. If it's the buyer that's going to be the exchanger, then the seller agrees to cooperate with the buyer exchanger. The addendum makes it clear that the seller won't be required to incur any additional delays or expense. Also, that the seller grants permission to assign the contract to an exchange intermediary and vice versa if the seller is the exchanger. So I think the form is pretty straightforward. I will say this, if you're not familiar with 1031 tax-deferred exchanges, then first thing you want to do is talk to your broker. But just make sure that you know what you're doing, because you don't want to run afoul of Indiana Code of Ethics Article 11, which requires that you know what you're doing and you're familiar with the area or whatever the subject matter is that you're talking about or dealing with. So this is the only new form I will go on and talk about some of the revisions now. So first one, as we go to the residential contract of sale, not too many substantive changes here. We always take this opportunity October 1st to correct any technical formatting errors and things like that, but there are really only just a couple of tweaks to the residential contract of sale. You look at paragraph 23, the adjustments, this last sentence. Now this sentence wasn't changed, just wanted to make sure that folks are aware. So we bolded that language. So any heating or cooking fuels remaining in supply tanks at the time of settlement shall become the property of the buyer. This is becoming an issue. There's a lot of instances sellers contract with the fuel provider might have been different. They were not aware of, and then the issue would arise at settlement. And so the committee felt it was important to include this bolded language in here to prompt the parties to have a conversation about this prior to settlement. You'll see the other change in paragraph 24 with settlement costs. And again, this is really just a clarification. If the buyer is a veteran obtaining a VA financing, the buyer broker may not charge a flat fee to buyer nor to seller per VA reg. Now, in the summary of changes in practice tips, I did include a couple of links just so that you have a clearer understanding of what the Statewide Forums Committee's rationale was for including this language in paragraph 24. So you can take a look at those links and get some additional information. One of them is to the actual CFR regulation and the other is to the VA handbook. So you can take a look at that. And then the only other change is to the last page in the contract, paragraph 60. It says buyer and seller hereby acknowledge that pursuant to section 21-101 of the commercial law article, that buyer and seller may conduct the transaction electronically. We get a lot of questions from members about whether or not under Maryland law you need a separate agreement to conduct the transaction electronically. Our position is that you don't. And so this is really just a notice to alert parties that they don't need to create a separate agreement to conduct the transaction electronically. So those really are the changes for the contract. Go on to the unimproved, of course, the unimproved residential contract of sale has those same changes in terms of paragraph 60 with the electronic transaction and conducting the transaction electronically. So I won't belabor that. I'll go on to the property inspections notice change there. So just one change here in the property inspections notice. And remember, this is not an addendum. This is a notice that facilitates what the parties have already agreed to in the property inspections addendum. So basically the highlighted language there, Maryland Realtors Property Inspections Addendum specifies the time periods agreed upon by the parties for any action, response, or notice. It's really just a reminder that if you have any questions about the time frame or when the inspection report should be submitted, then you want to double check the property inspections addendum because that's where the parties have agreed to the various inspections that this notice facilitates. So that's the only change to the property inspections notice. I'll go on and talk a little bit about the change in terms addendum. So this is a fairly new form. This came out October 1, 2019. The committee elected to make just a couple of updates to it, primarily with the written application for financing paragraph. It's actually going to be new paragraph 3, and then the written financing commitment is going to be new paragraph 4. Basically, that change was made to align with paragraph 10 of the contract of sale, because as you all know, the buyer has a certain amount of time to obtain a written application and a certain amount of time to obtain a written financing commitment. So we want to make sure that we're tracking the language in the contract of sale. And then the only other change to the change in terms addendum is the seller contribution is added there so the parties can agree to change the seller contribution. And remember, this form is to be used when the contract has already been formed and the party, one or the other, buyer or seller, wants to make a change to the existing contract. We are always of the mind, if there is a form that addresses it, use the form as opposed to having the parties prepare a blank addendum. So change in terms, we think that's a good form, and those are the changes. We'll go on to the escrow agreement. So you all are familiar. This form came out, I believe, in October of 2018. As you all know, as of October 1 of 2019, if the buyer and the seller agreed in the contract of sale that somebody other than a Maryland licensed real estate broker is going to hold the deposit, that the buyer, seller, and escrow agent have to enter into an escrow agreement. That is the law of the land today. This Maryland escrow agreement between buyer, seller, and escrow agent does satisfy the requirements under the law. The change here is to paragraph 7D, or the addition of paragraph 7D. So 7 deals with disputes. This really just gives the escrow agent an additional option or way to resolve deposit disputes. When you look at this language in paragraph 7D, you'll see that it is very similar, because it is, the 30-day letter that's outlined in the Brokerage Act. So basically, the escrow agent can now do a 30-day letter pursuant to this agreement, and they would follow the requirements that are laid out here, which is taken directly from the Brokerage Act. So that's the only change to the escrow agreement. And just remember, because we've gotten a couple of questions about this, if the parties have agreed that somebody other than a licensed real estate broker or Maryland broker will handle the deposit, they've got to have the escrow agreement signed. Doesn't have to be Maryland Realtors, but of course, this agreement satisfies the statute, and this is one of the options of forms that you can use. So go on to just a couple more changes, and then I'll turn it over to Kathleen. Changes to the exclusive right to sell. Very briefly, if you go down to paragraph 10, now not really any substantive change here. We added the home security systems provision a couple of years ago. And this change here, we're just adding a reference to the section in the code, so section 10-402. We always like to do that to make sure that you know what area of law that we're talking about. So it's just the addition there. And then under paragraph 21, there's new paragraph 21B, presentation of offers. So broker presents to the seller in a timely manner all written offers and counter offers, even if the property is subject to an existing contract of sale, unless seller has waived that obligation in writing. And remember, this is nothing new. The Brokerage Act requires it that you present all offers and counter offers in full to the client unless otherwise specified in the brokerage agreement. So we're just including that language in there as notification to the parties, but that's just a replication of the law coming into the agreement. So that's the only change to the exclusive right to sell. The same changes are made into the exclusive right to sell an improved land brokerage agreement where applicable, and then with the exclusive right to lease as well. So the only other change is to and this is just a very minor change to the buyer broker agreement. Since the law of agency changed to brokerage relationships, then we're trying to make sure that our agreements align as well. So you have a new title change, exclusive buyer tenant residential brokerage agreement. So that is it for the changes for Maryland Realtors forms. Like I said, the vendors, we have several forms licensing agreements with vendors. They have all been notified of these changes. So those forms, these new forms will post in your vendor libraries on October 1, and we will be posting the new forms, revised forms, and the summary of changes and practice tips on the Maryland Realtors website early next week. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over, I guess, back to you, John, or maybe to Kathleen.
Well, thank you, Colette.
You're welcome.
Great job, as always, by the Forms Committee, one of the hardest working committees we have. We'll now turn it over to Kathleen D'Artez, the Director of Legal Affairs. Kathleen.
All right, great. Thanks, John, and thanks, Colette. And yes, the statewide forms is one of the hardest working committees. I think you sat in on one of their meetings or a couple of their meetings. You've been on the committee as well. Their agenda is very robust. We get a lot of, Colette and I, at the whole legal department, we teach a lot of classes, and we obviously handle the legal hotline as well. And we do get a lot of comments and questions coming in. And if it's something about a form, Colette is fantastic about putting it on the agenda, and the committee will discuss whatever the issue might be. If it's a form that's not being utilized properly, or someone has a suggestion for a new form, it's going to be on the agenda. They will discuss it. I can't promise they'll act on every suggestion, but they are all fully discussed. So it's a great form, a great resource for our members. It's one of the member benefits whenever we do any kind of surveys. Access to the statewide forms is always one of the primary member benefits that people really appreciate. So awesome job, Colette. Thank you.
Kathleen, I'm sorry, before we get started, there's a couple outstanding questions going back to Bill's presentation and people want to know about the slides.
Okay.
The webinar is being recorded, right? So that's a good way to be able to retrieve the slides.
That is true.
No slides.
Okay, yeah, and Colette's too. Well, that stuff's on the website, so that's cool. There's a couple other questions that if Bill or you could answer, especially on source of income, Section 8, or housing vouchers and inspections and stuff like that. If you could.
Right. I was just going to say, we obviously source of income is a significant change. There are, as Bill pointed out, there are several jurisdictions throughout the state that have had source of income as a protected class for a long time. There are a lot of areas of the state that have not had source of income, and it really is could be a big change for those areas. We have another webinar coming up at the beginning of October, and because this is, it is a very nuanced issue, and there are a lot of questions, a lot of very detailed, very specific questions. So we were going to address that in more detail at the October webinar. I can't recall the date off the top of my head. Maybe Dan could chime in on that, or you, Chuck, if you know it off the top of your head. We wanted to have someone who is really an expert on Section 8 to be able to discuss all of those questions in great detail. What's permissible, what's not permissible? How about if, do I have to make a repair that's going to cost $500? Do I have to make a repair that's going to cost $20,000? That sort of thing. We wanted to really be able to go into detail, and that conversation honestly probably exceeds the scope of what time we have available today. So that was what our thought was, that would be addressed in more detail at the next webinar, which is going to be the beginning of October. You're muted. I think you're muted again.
That webinar will be October 8th.
October 8th. Okay. So get all your questions together. Dan will send out the registration link for that. You can submit questions in advance, so we can make sure that all of those questions are addressed in great detail at that time. Because I know that it's a change for a lot of people, and there are a lot of very detailed, nuanced questions, and we want to make sure that we address them fully and give that topic the amount of time that it deserves. So that's going to be the substance of our next webinar. All right. Was there any other questions? I guess the slides, you're going to deal with that? Dan can share the slides. Okay, I think we're good. All right, I'll go back to just what I was going to talk about. Just in general, we staff the legal hotline, and one of the probably recurring themes or questions that's come up, one of the hot topics this year, it really is fair housing. A variety of ways that fair housing has come to the forefront. One of the main things, if you all as brokers have not watched this video, I would really, really, really encourage you to do so. There was a video that was released at the beginning of the year. Newsday was the name of the organization. They did an investigation in Long Island in New York, and it was audio and video recording of agents, and they had testers. And the video is really strong and powerful and detailed. And, we teach fair housing. We can talk about steering all day, every day. It will not have the impact that watching that video will have. So I would just say, for you as brokers, managers, for good risk management practice or technique, if you have not watched that video, you should. I would encourage you to watch it with your agents if at all possible. I believe it's 40-something minutes, but it goes through a lot of detail. And it doesn't just talk about agents or agents' bad conduct or misconduct, although that certainly is part of it. Part of it is agent conduct, and this is what you should be aware of as a supervisor dealing with your agents and talking with your agents. They need to be aware or make sure that the policy or practice that they're doing for one applicant, they are following the exact same policy or practice for another applicant. And that video shows very clearly that that is not the case in Long Island. That was not the case in Long Island. 49% of the Black applicants were discriminated against. They did not receive the same professional services that applicants of other races did receive. And of course, their testers said they were identically qualified, same income, same credit score, same everything. And some of the agents, one person did not have a pre-qualification letter. The Black applicant did not have a pre-qualification letter, speaks with the agent and wants to go look at houses. And the agent shuts the Black applicant down and says, I don't show you any houses. I don't show anyone any houses unless they have a pre-qualification letter. Sorry, I can't do it. They show the exact same agent speaking with a white applicant, a potential buyer, who does not have a pre-qualification letter. And the white applicant is asked, when do you want to go out and start looking at houses? It's very, very blatant and very clear. So again, I just say for good practice for you to look at that with your agents and see how they're handling those type of situations. Another one that came up, a very common situation, even listings. If someone inquires about a property in a certain neighborhood, depending on who the applicant was, sometimes they were provided with listings for that neighborhood. Sometimes they were not. The word is steering. It really is. Sometimes they were steered toward properties that were available in other neighborhoods. Sometimes they weren't responded to at all. The agents didn't even deal with the applicant. So it's a bad situation. It's important, though, that we all look at that we're all aware of it, and that we're all prepared to discuss that and to deal with that. So those are some of the things that were addressed in that video with respect to agent behavior. I will just throw in another thing that has probably been more of a recent occurrence. Like I said, that I think was January of this year when that was first made public. In the interim, in the months since then, we've had a couple questions on the legal hotline, and I'm sure you guys are all aware of this as well. Social media posts, what agents are posting on social media. That is a concern. Again, obviously, you know, here in Maryland, we have broker supervision. And we have had some questions coming into the legal hotline where an agent has posted something, I think the word that's typically used is inflammatory, some inflammatory statement on social media, basically with respect to protests or you know, the criminal justice system. And there's been a lot of protests ongoing. There have been a lot of comments posted on social media about that. We have received inquiries here on the hotline about the ill consequences or bad effect that might have on the brokerage. And you guys all know this, we all know this. It's very easy to find people on social media, to identify who they work for. We've been contacted by a couple brokers. One broker had terminated their relationship with their agent because the agent had posted something on social media that was so inflammatory that there was some negative blowback on the broker. Do you condone this type of language? Do you, you know, why do you have racist agents working for your company? That type of thing. So it was at the level where the agent, the broker, excuse me, terminated their relationship with that agent. And the issue that, one of the issues that came to our attention was the agent had not updated their Facebook business page. And it still said the name of that broker, that they were still affiliated with that broker. So the broker contacted us, was very concerned, obviously, because there was negative publicity and negative feedback coming back to that brokerage because of those comments. So we had contacted, I guess, the new broker basically as a heads up. Obviously, broker supervision, one of the things you're supposed to be looking at is your agent's advertising, right? And they're supposed to accurately reflect which company they work for. So we contacted the next broker just as a courtesy to give them a heads up. And I think by the time we spoke with that broker, they had also terminated their relationship with that agent. So I'm just putting this out there. I know that you all have seen these posts, you're aware of these posts. Just be aware that there could be negative consequences to the brokerage for these type of things. I know you can't sit and read everybody's Facebook posts all day, every day, but if you're made aware of something, you have to act. You do have to take some sort of action and respond to those posts. There can be negative consequences for you as a company. And also within realtor world, I know that the National Association of Realtors, there were some matters that were brought to their attention. Again, the same type of thing, inflammatory social media posts, and at least 2 members their membership was terminated. Their membership in the National Association of Realtors was terminated. So NAR took action against 2 people, terminated their relationship. They're no longer, their membership, excuse me. They are no longer realtors. They're not realtors at the national level, the state level, or the local level because of things they posted on social media. So this is just the reality that we're dealing with. And you as a broker, you are responsible for supervising your people. If you haven't had that conversation with your agents, you need to. It's an issue, and it is an important issue, and it really is an ongoing issue. So that's just at the agent level. The Newsweek video, again, from Long Island, they also talked about brokerages and what the brokerages, the role of the brokerages. One thing that they mentioned, which I would just say for you, just in passing, just to think about, again, who you're hiring, who are you recruiting, how are you finding your recruits? Or is it just a friend of a friend, someone who you know? That can tend to reinforce patterns where you maybe don't have a diverse group of agents in your office, a group of realtors. If you maybe look outside that or try and think a little bit more creatively to reach beyond that group, you're going to have better chances of increasing the diversity within your brokerage. Obviously, that strengthens your brokerage, and you'll have better decision making, better teamwork, hopefully with a more diverse organization. So that was at the brokerage level. One thing specifically they mentioned, certain communities, there were no brokerage offices at all, which again, I wouldn't have occurred to me, but just if you're in a position where you're expanding your offices or relocating or adding an additional office, Godspeed, great, that's awesome, that's terrific news. But maybe think about where your offices are. And if you have an opportunity to locate a new office in maybe a more diverse community or a community that you haven't served previously, that might be an opportunity to develop a lot of additional business or recruit additional agents that maybe you just haven't thought of in that way. And that was one of the things they specifically mentioned in that Newsday video as well. Certain communities were underserved by real estate brokerages and by our industry. And also, I mean, there was plenty of blame to go around in that video. They also made some comments about the boards and specifically about fair housing. And there were some issues with how fair housing classes were being taught. In New York, it sounds like they do a whole day of continuing education, and my light just went out. It's me. Okay. One of the components of that day is fair housing. And there were some local boards that were spending all of 15 minutes talking about fair housing and not, giving it very short shrift and basically saying, you can follow the rules if you want. Sometimes people are going to know what the speed limit is. They're still going to speed. Clearly, that's not permissible. That's not the message we want to be communicating. That's not the message you want to be communicating. So all of those things are important. And I would say, obviously, focus on those, share that information with your agents, have those conversations with your agents if you have not done so already. So there's the fair housing component to that. And also that kind of segues into professionalism, which like John had mentioned and Bill mentioned that as well. At the National Association of Realtors, they have increased their focus on professionalism. Here at the state level, that was one of John's initiatives, and we were fortunate to get that approved, and that was a lot of Bill's steering and guidance there as well. So the content for the required ethics class is changing as of October 1, and it does include a professionalism component now. It's been modified a little bit. Predatory lending is that phrase is out of the new outline. It's called fraudulent mortgage practices, I believe, instead. But the one thing, there is the addition of a professional component, and there also is an additional component talking about dispute resolution and different methods of resolving disputes. And the one thing that Colette and I wanted to talk about specifically, I'm not sure that all of you as brokers are aware that there's a program called Ombuds Program. That is a program that is offered. NAR requires all of the local boards to offer that. And what it is, basically just a quick overview of it, it's essentially a telephone mediation. So if a client is unhappy with one of your agents, they're unhappy with another agent, if two of your agents are unhappy with each other, you could direct them to contact the local board, and the local board has members who have been trained in dispute resolution, and specifically with this Ombuds program. And what it is, the person who calls in, if they're complaining to whoever answers the phone at the local board, they could suggest that one method of resolving disputes is this Ombuds program, and I can direct you to one of our members who's been trained as an ombuds and trained in dispute resolution. So if the person agrees, they'll be referred to an ombuds. They'll speak on the phone with the party who's making the complaint. They'll speak on the phone with the party who's being complained about, and the ombuds can hopefully bring the two parties together and help them reach a resolution. The parties have to reach the resolution. The ombuds doesn't tell them you're going to do this, that, or the other, but hopefully work them together, bring them together so they can reach a resolution. Or if not, the ombuds can point out additional resources for the person who's complaining. They may end up filing an ethics complaint with the local board. They may end up going to the real estate commission. Obviously, all of us has the same objective here. We don't want complaints to be filed with the local board. We don't want complaints to be filed with the Maryland Real Estate Commission. So if you are not aware of the Ombuds program, I would try to make sure that you are, make sure that you know it's a resource. And if you have a client or a customer who's unhappy, you might want to suggest that as an option to resolve any complaint or dispute. They may not want to talk to you as a broker or manager. They might just think you're going to say whatever you have to say to back up your agent. The Ombuds program offers offers them a neutral third party who's not part of your brokerage, not part of your company, and hopefully be a way to resolve those disputes. And we have heard specifically from some of the local boards who have seen great success with the ombuds program, so much so that there has been a drop off in the number of ethics complaints that have been filed. Prince George's County specifically said they had had tremendous success with the ombuds program, where they had seen the number of complaints that were filed, seen the number drop. So again, we're pushing that. Yes, we're pushing you to utilize that. It's a great option. And again, that's in everyone's interest to try and resolve disputes early on in the process, so we don't have to have complaints filed and use your administrative time, waste your agent's time. We'd all like to be spending our time on money generating activities, right? Not defending claims or preparing to defend claims. So promote that every chance you get. The other thing that I wanted to add, just a little bit of time, it kind of ties back to what we have been talking about again, fair housing and source of income specifically. Let me see if I can just share this one slide. I don't know if everybody heard on the radio or the news yesterday, the DC Attorney General's office. Did everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay. The DC Attorney General's office has filed complaints against several brokerages, property managers, real estate professionals in DC, specifically tied to source of income, right? And what was happening here is that the properties were being advertised, and the advertisement said various forms of no Section 8 vouchers accepted, properties not approved for Section 8, landlord doesn't accept Section 8, landlord doesn't accept vouchers, you know, various variations on that theme. And that was in the advertisement. And these advertisements were on Craigslist or, you know, apartment.com, various real estate sites in the District of Columbia. I put this quote up here, which violates all the rules of good PowerPoint presentations. I know there's too much text and it's too long and it doesn't have any cool graphics or anything like that to look at. But seriously, we should all read this. This is our role right here. I'm just gonna read it out loud. Although housing discrimination is problematic in any form, it is even more concerning when perpetuated by the real estate profession. Real estate professionals, including brokers, salespersons, and property managers, play an integral role in connecting customers to housing, including low-income tenants seeking an affordable place to live. They may dispense advice to property owners on how to market properties, and they act as gatekeepers for renters and buyers. When a broker discriminates against potential tenants who use housing assistance programs, he not only violates his professional licensing standards, but lends dangerous credibility to discriminatory practices. Defendants' discriminatory online advertisements for rental housing lend professional credence to the idea that turning away tenants based on their source of income is not only acceptable, but lawful. In the district, it is neither. And again, as we just discussed, in Maryland, as of October 1, it is neither as well. So I don't, you know, we can't really emphasize this enough. This is something that needs to be taken seriously. You know, people winking and looking the other way or thinking that fair housing is something that they don't really, it's just this class they have to take every 2 years. It's not something that they really need to worry about. That clearly is not true. There are things that come up on a regular basis. There are issues that come up with how people conduct their business, clearly directly tied to fair housing. And there's enforcement actions that are occurring. HUD is bringing enforcement actions against people. States are bringing enforcement actions against people. It's a very, very, very hot topic right now. So that was what I did want to mention that. And the only other thing, we did have one question submitted in advance. This was a little bit surprising to me, but there was a question about E&O insurance. I'll talk about E&O insurance maybe for 3 minutes. If that's okay? E&O insurance, I think everybody who's on the call hopefully is aware of that as a broker. It basically is malpractice insurance for brokers. It's going to cover conduct from your agents while they're providing real estate brokerage services. So that's probably in essence what it is. I would say though, if you are not aware of that, or if you don't have a good relationship or don't have any relationship with your E&O provider, I would encourage you to do so, and you should develop that relationship and nurture that relationship, because they can do a lot more for you than just sell you a policy, right? And they can give you guidance on a lot of different matters. One specific thing that I can think of is agent-owned property. If you have agents in your office who own property and they're selling property, do they want to run it through the brokerage, maybe, you know, and something happens? Is that transaction going to be covered under your E&O policy? Not necessarily. You should take a look at your E&O policy and see what the requirements are. Typically, the E&O policy contains very specific requirements for agent-owned property. The agents may be required to utilize statewide forms. That's typically one requirement. The agent may be required to offer a home inspection or offer a home warranty, whatever it is. But I would strongly suggest talking with your E&O representative or take a look at your E&O policy and make sure that whatever those requirements are, that they match the policies that you have in your policy and procedure manual. You don't want to do something inadvertently where your agent's transaction is not going to be covered by your E&O policy and they may have to go out of pocket or you may have to go out of pocket. The question also had asked about the premiums for E&O policy and how they're calculated. For the most part, that is based on your commission revenue and what type of transactions you enter into, whether it's commercial, whether it's residential. If you're doing property management, those are rated a little bit higher because there are more claims filed related to property management. So again, you would discuss all of those with your E&O rep. One other little pro tip for you guys, brokers can handle this however they want to do it. You could pay the premium. You may charge a fee to your agents where they pay a certain amount per year for E&O coverage. Well, the little pro tip I was going to suggest to everybody is if you do charge that fee to your agents, you should not refer to that as insurance. Don't call that an E&O insurance fee. You can call it a risk management fee, a risk reduction fee. Don't use the word insurance because that could be considered, you have to have a license to sell insurance, obviously. And there's some cases from other areas where a broker has been accused of wrongfully selling insurance because they identified that fee as being for insurance. So be careful again about that. If you have any questions about that, I'd say probably talk to your E&O carrier. They could give you some additional guidance on that. And anything else, Colette, I'm forgetting? I guess advertising in general is always a hot topic. As you guys know from broker supervision, you are supposed to review your agent's advertising before they post it, before they prepare their marketing materials. Theoretically, in the perfect world, that does happen. In the real world, oftentimes it happens after the advertising has been placed and you might hear a complaint from someone. Obviously, the ideal situation is to review it in advance. I would say maybe this is a good opportunity for you with all of this talk about fair housing, all of these concerns, and especially source of income. That might be a good opportunity for you to maybe have another conversation with your agents about their advertising, what's permissible, what's not permissible. Encourage them to run the ads by you before they publish them. And again, the other resources available there is the Real Estate Commission has an advertising checklist. If you don't utilize that, I would say that's a good resource for all of you as brokers. And you might want to share that with your agents, again, just to show that you've communicated that to them, that you have made them aware of what the requirements are for all advertisements. You might want to have them turn that in or initial that or something when they turn in advertisements as well, just to show that you have made them aware of what the requirements are under Maryland law. I think that was really it I was going to cover. Is there anything else? We have any questions that came up?
No other questions that came up. Oh, we just had one. Is there going to be an actual one-click rule? I don't believe guidelines have been updated to reflect the world we live in today. The checklist is very old.
Well, the one-click rule, that's an interesting question. Bill, you might want to chime in on this. What it is, if everybody's not familiar with the one-click rule, the National Association of Realtors adopted the one-click rule back in 2016 under the NAR Code of Ethics. Maryland, we're not quite there yet. As you all know, the advertising requirements, there's a lot of technical requirements for an advertisement, right? The licensee has to include their name. They have to include the name of their team if they're part of a team. They have to include the name of their company, their brokerage company, the Dartez team, over with ABC Realty. The name of my team and the brokerage have to be conspicuously linked, and also if I'm using my phone number, the company phone number, the broker's phone number has to be on there as well. That's a lot of information that is required to be included before you even get to a place where you're talking about the property, right? So we advertise on social media. We're doing digital advertising, electronic advertising, especially with Twitter. There's a very limited geography, very limited number of characters. You may not be able to include all of that information. So what the National Association of Realtors said, well, if in your advertising, if you have a link in there, if a user or prospective client could click on that link and with one click, they are brought brought to your business page, your Teams page, your Facebook business page, whatever it is, some website or some location where all of the required information is displayed, then that would be permissible. If they can get to all of the required information with one click, then it's okay. They've satisfied the requirement. So that's the NAR rule. Here in Maryland, what we have is, Bill, again, jump in if I'm wrong, but the Real Estate Commission had a meeting, and at their meeting, they voted and they said, yes, Maryland, we are going to adopt a one-click rule. Yes, we approve that. And the Real Estate Commission voted and did approve it. But the way the process works, it then goes to the attorneys, and the attorneys have to draft a regulation. There has to be a regulation in place, what the requirements are. All the required information has to appear on the top of the page or the top third of the page or whatever it might be. So they have to draft a regulation. And then after the regulation is drafted, I believe it comes back to the commission for a final approval. Then it's published in the Maryland Register. And this is the way the law works in Maryland for regulations. They're published, I believe, for 60 days. There's a period of public comment. If your IT professionals or US brokers have some sort of feedback on that, this won't work, that won't work, this isn't clear, you can provide feedback to the Real Estate Commission during that period of public comment, and then they may modify the regulation if there are significant public comments. They may decide to adopt it and implement it as originally written. And my understanding is that we are somewhere in that regulatory drafting process. That the commission voted at a meeting, yes, we're going to approve the one-click rule, but to the best of my knowledge, the regulations have not yet been drafted. Is that correct, Bill? Do you know any other updates on that?
Yeah, I don't know that they've drafted them or not, but it definitely has not been submitted in publication yet for the register. So that's where you would have the opportunity to make public comment on it. So once it's been finalized, it gets submitted to the register, and that kicks off that comment period. And that would be the point where, we would weigh in, brokers, agents can weigh in, and then they will take a look at all that comment, make changes, not make changes, and then finalize the rule.
Okay, so we're sort of in a gray area, unfortunately. But we're watching it. We get the Maryland Register. I know we receive it every Friday, so we're looking at that. As soon as the regulations are published, obviously we'll be on top of that, and we'll make you all aware of that as well. Is there any other questions?
Yeah, there's this question here. I hope I get this right. It's from an anonymous person. Question about the professionalism edition. What does it say regarding what does it say?
Well, the regulation says there has to be a professionalism component in the class. What was the exact language from the bill? I think it just added the word professionalism, if I'm correct, if my recollection is correct. Maryland Realtors, we did work, our education department worked with our government affairs department and the legal department as well. And we did come up with a proposed outline. And Susan Mitchell from our government affairs department, she submitted that to the Real Estate Commission, and they did approve that, the outline that we had prepared and submitted. And again, I think if you guys have taken ethics through your local boards, our goal is to have the one ethics class satisfy your NAR requirement and your Maryland Real Estate Commission requirement. So that one class talks a little bit about the NAR Code of Ethics and also about the Maryland Code of Ethics. So in our outline, we did add the professionalism component. And it's talking about basically professional conduct in our industry, definition of principles and applications to our industry. We have honesty, fairness, integrity, excellence, and we referred to specific regulations in Maryland, back to specific sections in COMAR in the Code of Ethics to sort of pin those concepts to the Maryland regulations very specifically. And again, duties to clients and customers, respect for the public, peers, property, and parties. And again, that's sort of where the instructor would have some wiggle room or some discretion maybe to talk about topical issues, things that are coming up in your day-to-day practice. Again, if Colette or me or someone from the legal department is talking, we could just, if there's sort of a theme or trend on the legal hotline, if we're hearing a lot of questions about a particular type of conduct or misconduct, that would be where we would add that type of thing in that section of the class. So that's generally how we had prepared ours. And to be consistent again with what the regulation says or the statute says in Maryland, and also to be compliant with the NAR's requirement as well.
Okie dokie. Well, let me see. Oh, for the Realtor Fest this year, although that did the ethics CE class include professionalism?
No.
No, it did not.
Takes effect October 1st.
Okay.
I guess that was G-Cars Realtor Fest. My understanding is
I would assume,
not
okay.
included in that class as of that point in time.
Yeah, actually, if they included the new content, you honestly, you probably wouldn't get credit for it because the law changes as of October 1. So up until October 1, you have to include the old content to be in compliance with the law. October 1 forward, you have to include the new content. So I would agree with Chuck on that. It's very unlikely that G-Cars class included the new content.
So take it again.
There you go.
Well, there was a professionalism class that was approved by, and that's what we basically did. And to go back to what started this whole thing was I took that class, and to be quite frank with everyone, I looked around the room and the people that were attending the class really didn't need to take a professionalism class. So that's what sparked my idea of making it mandatory for license renewal, that we would get the 98% of the people that wouldn't volunteer to take the class, we would get once every 2 years, and we could teach them the golden rules all over again about thank you and those types of things. So that's how it came about. So it's really not new. It's just been restructured and put into a different class.
So thank John.
That's good.
There was another question just asking if you have to retake the class again after October 1st. And the answer is if you've already taken it, you don't. And if you're starting a new license period with a new license after October 1st, then actually that's going to be the only class that you are going to be able to take is an ethics and professionalism class. So it'll kind of be a moot point at that point.
But again, doesn't mean you can't take it. Remember, 15
Correct.
is the minimum number of hours. There is no maximum. So if you're interested, take it again.
And all our questions have been answered by this wonderful panel. So I guess we turn it over to John to close us out. Any words, John, of wisdom?
Words of wisdom? You turned it over to the wrong person.
I'm going to go on mute now because
Yes, I know. Yes, thanks, Chuck, because I'm sure you would have comments on anything I'm going to say. No, I am pleased to have served on this panel with this distinguished group. And I can say that because I've had the experience of working with them for a year now as president, almost a year. I got 3 weeks left, I think, or 2 weeks left. But over the last 4 or 5 years, I've gotten to know them all and worked with them as I was coming through the ranks. And I've served on committees with Colette. And I was on the Forms Committee back when we had this other attorney in the room. His name was Chuck Katsky. Those were some exciting meetings too. So, but every opportunity I get to address our members, I always tell you what a great staff you have. I have to reiterate that because, and I know Chuck talked about them, but he should be included as well. The leadership that he gave for the staff during this unprecedented, he hates that word, that's why I use it every chance I get, unprecedented term of what we're dealing with as far as this pandemic. And I can't brag on them enough, believe me. They were working tireless hours. We were all caught with this thing, and the next thing you know, the governor would come out with an announcement, and then we would have to interpret that. And I was getting emails back and forth, and they didn't end at 5 o'clock. I was getting emails from these staff members you see here and others at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night because we were answering my questions. And we would present something, get it all finalized. I even did videos. And the next thing you know, the next day, the governor would come out with something else that might have modified what we did. So I am a raving fan, if you will, of our staff. And that's what keeps our organization running like it does. And that's all the opportunities you can have to contact them. It's lovely to see a face now. This new media that we're using is going to benefit us all, I think. And I appreciate your time. I appreciate their time. And thank you very much for attending.
Thank you for your leadership, John. It was really a pleasure working with you. We all appreciate you very much.
Very much so. And thank you all for visiting our webinar today. And just as a reminder, our next webinar is September 24th, where Chuck will chat with our incoming president, Dee Dee Miller. And we'll have details on that soon. Until then, have a great day and send your questions to communications@mdrealtor.org, and we'll be happy to get them answered if they weren't answered here. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.